Forgive me, YouTube, for I have sinned. I somehow said that Lenin was a Lutheran. No, his mother was a Lutheran. Lenin was baptized by the Russian Orthodox Church while having a Lutheran mother. Now, his mother only had a casual interest in the faith, but since his mother was a saint in his eyes, Lutheranism was an element in his upbringing, so my error was that I just didn't explain it properly, leading people to claim that I was flat out wrong or hadn't done my research. No, my error was that I didn't explain it properly. However, there were more criticisms besides this, and I don't think any of the others stand up to scrutiny. If I remember, I'll put timestamps in the description so that you can see the specific criticisms I'll be addressing, but first, I want to read this particular comment.
There's a new Karate Kid movie coming out next year. What is that? I've been hearing things about that it's... I've been hearing that it's like it's going to have Jaden Smith or Jackie Chan. No, it's not Jaden Smith. It's going to have Jackie Chan and Ralph Macchio. Because Jackie Chan was in the Jaden Smith one. And so it's like, what is this? The multiverse of Karate Kid? I don't get it. I've been hearing weird things about that here and there.
And my response to it, because I think it's an important one. You couldn't express more truth. I had quite a hard childhood with an absent and psychologically violent father and an extremely loving but destroyed mother. Despite good student abilities, I had to struggle a lot against myself to go further. My rebel instinct, and even time has passed and I started my own company now. I still struggle terribly against my laziness.
This person seems to be like French or something, because there's typos in here that are like autocorrect to French words. Like he was clearly trying to write extremely, but he writes extrêmement. Or instead of A, he writes this sort of with a diacritic on it.
And a lack of discipline. Fortunately, I'm good in what I do, but it's an everyday struggle. The refusal of my well-being not to betray my victimal mother against my capitalist father is still present as a reflex in my everyday life. I'm seeing a therapist to keep my life together, but your conclusions helped me a lot more today than an hour I spent from 7 PM to 8 PM with him. Thank you, TIK, you're awesome. And I said, there's a book called The 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem by Nathaniel Branden that you may want to check out. It has helped me personally, and by the sounds of it, I think you'll get something from it too.
Where's the energy, TIK? Come on. Read with a little bit more theater.
A lot of psychology has been based on the works of Freud and Jung, both of whom were Hermeticists. Thus, in my opinion, and it is just an opinion, a lot of therapists are ill-equipped to deal with real-life issues. It therefore falls upon our...
I don't think that much psychology these days is really grounded in any of the theories of Freud or Jung. Most of the times I hear psychologists talk about Freud and Jung, they talk about it as like a really archaic school of psychology that's no longer even part of the sort of the landscape of theory that they use. So obviously the whole field of psychology is grounded in the works of its founders, who are Freud and Jung, but I don't know that any of their theory actually survives in the modern soft science of psychology.
Our shoulders to do the majority of the work to figure ourselves out. For me personally, I have found the works of Ayn Rand and Leonard Peikoff's books on objectivism extremely helpful.
What do I do for work? I am unemployed right now. I'm trying to get into delivery driving, but I'm having bad experiences. Like, it's not working for me yet. It's the app is just glitchy and doesn't work. yeah, it's a nightmare right now. But hopefully I'll be able to get that working for me so that I can make a little bit more money. How much do I weight? How much do you weight? I well, I've been weighing myself lately because I'm trying to lose weight right now because I have too much. I've had too much fat on my body for quite some time now. It's more than I need. Uh and so I'm trying to lose maybe 30 pounds. That seems about right for me. But today I weighed 206 pounds, which means I'm actually gaining weight right now. Now, part of that weight gain is that I'm building muscle, and part of it specifically for today is that last night I ate like a whole roll of Oreos, so that's gonna add something because Oreos are about 50 calories a piece. But yeah, trying to work out more.
Even if at first it doesn't seem like they should be. The negative stigma they have delayed me from looking into them, and I regret that. There's no point in building a house on sand. You've got to have a good philosophical foundation, otherwise it's a fruitless endeavour. I wanted to read that because there was a lot of comments like this, and we are talking about childhood upbringings and how that influenced people in their adulthood, so it's worth talking about it. I also wanted to provide the knowledge of Jung and Freud being hermeticists, which explains why a lot of psychology is just totally off the mark.
I didn't even know that.
And also give the recommendation of Brandon's book on self-esteem. I'm still working my way through it, but it's been good so far, so if anyone is struggling with self-esteem, you may want to check this out. There was this comment as well. I'm seeing a scary amount of parallels with my own life. Abusive absent father, altruistic, and believing I wasn't worth it. Forced to become a baker in a traumatizing work environment in order to support my siblings.
Forced to become a baker, okay. Interesting. Also interesting profile picture on this person. So apparently this video that this is a follow-up to was about like having abusive or absentee fathers, which is kind of what I predicted because, I mean, that's the one thing I know about Hitler is that he had a dumb, kind of drunk father. Also, Oswald Mosley had a total, like, failure, burnout, layabout father who was just a dumb moron, basically. Like, Oswald Mosley's dad was a totally pathetic idiot. And his grandfather was actually more of a real father figure to him. But it's not like he even needed a father figure in life because he was his own father figure. Like, his mom called him her man-child, which of course has a different connotation these days than it did back in the 1900s. But that's what she called him because he was like already trying to run the house when he was a kid.
I honestly don't know how I stopped myself from going down that path. I eventually had enough space to resume studying. I got a career and...
Hold on. Freud and Jung are certainly still present. Archetypes, libido, death drive, the unconscious, etc. It's been grandfathered into the whole of psychology. Same goes with William James and behaviorists. Well, someone needs to tell that to the people I've been hearing from, because I've heard like people within the sort of psychology field claim that Freud basically like has no, or Freud, really more Freud than Jung, has no real foothold in psychology anymore. But it seems like those guys and the terms that they created are still present. Jung was a Gnostic, yes. I didn't know that.
Love working.
How is Hermeticism related to Gnosticism?
I think a bit of it has to do with my response to the feminist part of our culture. Even though I am trans, I was still always taught to be ashamed of myself for being born male. Like I was a monster by default, even though I had done nothing. You will benefit from reading Brendan's book on self-esteem, and also Leonard Peikoff's book, The Cause of Hitler's Germany. It will explain to you why you had to be shamed. Your concept of self...
Introduction by Ayn Rand. Okay, I was confused about what that said.
...had to be destroyed.
I don't know if you can see that
in order to make
here. No, you can't. Let me...
But what's interesting about this is that people were saying
Introduction by Ayn
I was
Rand
wrong,
right there.
And yet other people in the comments were bringing up their own personal experiences and telling me I was spot on. So while I admit that more work needs to be done on this subject, I think we're onto something here. That said, it's onto the criticism now. We'll start with some of the simple ones, including the silly criticism that basically denied everything that we were hearing. They said that there is no pattern, or that I had no evidence to support my claims, even though I obviously did use evidence. I had references at the bottom of the screen, and I also didn't just make up the pattern. If you read about these people, you'll see that they all have a very similar upbringing. From what I can tell from online sources, Che Guevara also fits the bill, as does Fidel Castro, and others. And yet, these people just dismiss me. It's almost as if they didn't want to see the pattern for their own personal reasons, and so dismissed it without giving it a fair consideration. And I think the question then becomes, why? Have these people had traumatic upbringings? Did the topic bring up memories that they would not rather have? There's a definite pattern of people on my channel refusing to consider certain ideas, and I've always found that fascinating. I understand that people have different interests, and I don't expect people to always agree. But this isn't that. Denying or dismissing the identified pattern as simply being nonsense.
Okay, now I'm really curious about what this pattern is, because we've had some allusions to it having something to do with having an absentee father. But that's all I know so far. And so, what exactly is this pattern? If I'd have seen the original video, of course I would know. But, I haven't, because I thought that this video would explain it. It probably will, but let's see.
Is a very strange thing, in my opinion. People then said that I am wrong because parental issues aren't a sufficient answer.
Parental issues, okay. Each tradition, Hermetics and Gnostics, contain mystical elements, including the idea that material reality is flawed or illusory, and that true spiritual insight transcends ordinary experience. Both emphasize the pursuit of hidden or secret knowledge that leads to spiritual awakening and understanding divine truths. But are they genetically related? Is there a taxonomical connection between Gnosticism and Hermeticism? Because Hermeticism comes out of alchemy, right? And Gnosticism, I'm not sure that that has any connection with alchemy, but it might.
They said that the problem of parental issues by itself doesn't explain these people. Or they argued that many people have parental problems and that not all of them became socialists or mass murderers. And I think in this instance, my critics have missed the point. It's not that parental issues by itself, in isolation, is the cause, but rather that parental issues combined with an altruistic morality system, a self-hatred, and an inability to turn to religion for salvation is the problem. It's not one thing in isolation, but the whole lot of it put together. Let's put it another way. You need eggs, milk, and flour to make a cake. No, Tik. You're wrong. Eggs by themselves don't make a cake. Yes, I know, eggs by themselves don't make a cake. You need all the ingredients combined in order to make a cake. And similarly, parental issues by themselves don't make a socialist. You need all the ingredients combined in order to get them.
This video might not actually be bad. This might actually be the first okay TIK history video I've seen, because so far, I mean, if he notices this pattern in socialists, including, of course, some people on the far right whom he would deem socialist and other people wouldn't, but what they have in common, I guess, with communists is that they have this sort of new man revolutionary approach to politics on a kind of populist level. There is definitely a lot of connection you find between far right and far left politics, and that's the whole point of horseshoe theory, which I actually think is an underrated theory in certain respects. I think people really overly dismissive of horseshoe theory, because I do think it's pointing to some important ideas and some true ideas. And so, yeah, if his whole point is that he looked into the biographical details of all of these people and found a certain pattern, then I think it would actually be a very interesting line of inquiry to pursue. And I might think that the people criticizing him for this are being too quick to kind of jump to the defense of something. Don't know exactly why they feel the need to do that, but a lot of people are very defensive like this. But let's keep going.
And that's why a clearly defined pattern was evident. Every single critic who said that parental issues weren't a sufficient explanation isolated the one issue of parental issues from all the other factors and ignored the wider context. I'm not sure why they did that, but they did, and again, it was really bizarre in my opinion. Then again, perhaps there was a reason. As this person said, everyone has parental issues. I see that you have some real socialists in your comments section. And this could be it. Maybe I'm holding up the mirror and people don't like the reflection.
Yeah, it reminds me of this there's this amazing movie called I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Charlie Kaufman. One of my favorite movies, probably in my top 10. And there's a part where you see the main character in the movie is actually just a hypothetical being imagined by this other character who's her boyfriend. And so he's like having this sort of imaginary road trip with this imaginary girlfriend to go visit his parents decades in the past, which never happened. It's kind of complicated to explain. But there's a part where he's talking to her about his parents, and he says, "We've had our issues." And she responds, "Jesus, Jake, everyone has issues with their parents." And he goes, "Yeah, I guess that's true." And I've always liked that part of the movie, that line, because it's him talking to himself. And it's him doing this sort of self-criticism where he thinks he's explaining to this hypothetical girlfriend that he has issues with his parents, and then his hypothetical girlfriend retorts, "Well, everyone has issues with their parents, so that doesn't make you special." And and then he agrees with her. He agrees with this critic in his mind that's telling him that he's wrong for saying something that he really shouldn't be shamed for saying. But it's a great kind of bit of writing, sort of looking at how people with self-esteem issues think. And I guess this video is also about self-esteem issues to some extent. He keeps bringing up that book.
Anyway, some were dismissing the pattern I've identified, but then saying that it was simply mental illness that is the cause. Well, it's been a while, so I think it's worth playing it for old time's sake. It's the Madman Hitler card. If you don't understand someone else's behaviour or point of view, just call them insane and don't bother to understand their reasoning or how they came to their conclusions. I get called mentally ill all the time by my critics, and the reason why is because they don't understand any of my...
Let's read this. LMAO, I remember when TIK wasn't completely insane. The fact that you're trying to use this as an argument against them is insane and borderline evil. Hegel actually was trying to describe an actual process. His ideas essentially predicted quantum mechanics. Just because you are mentally ill and can't understand them doesn't mean something. I think he messed up at in the last few words there. Yeah, I mean, I have called TIK's sanity into question in my last video just because he consistently demonstrated an inability to analyze anything. But in this video so far, I think he's okay. He seems to be taking a pretty measured and reasonable point of view on this issue.
My views. They've not listened. They're not listening. And they're just jumping to stupid conclusions. Well, if these people can't accurately understand me, what chance have they got with National Socialism, Fascism, or Marxism? Rather than understand why these socialists came to their views, they just throw out the Madman Hitler card and say they must be...
And I like that he's doing this. I like that he's saying, understand people's point of view from their perspective. Don't just assume that they're madmen. Now, in the case of Hitler, it's kind of interesting because I think part of what made Hitler a difficult politician to deal with is that he actually believed the things that he said. And that's not something that people were used to. They were used to this idea that if you were a politician, then you were a person who could listen to reason, who could make compromises, who could cooperate with people, and come to a certain understanding. And so everybody wanted to reason with Hitler. But no, Hitler just kind of wanted to do what he was going to do, what he said he was going to do in Mein Kampf. And he really didn't much care for cooperation. Now, I don't think that makes him insane, but it does make him, it means he was operating on a different plane than most other politicians at the time. And I don't think we can necessarily shame those politicians too much for not anticipating that, because he was kind of a wild card who really, how could they expect that out of Hitler? But at the same time, there were some people who were a little bit, I think, who maybe understood Hitler a little bit better. I think Stalin probably understood Hitler better than most any other politician in Europe at the time.
Be mentally ill. Well, it may look like a mental illness.
Hitler also had a strong predilection for amphetamines, which may have affected his thinking. Yeah, well, if you're always on stimulants, you're going to be a little bit manic, and you're going to kind of think of yourself as a Superman. And so that's an important part of his psychology, I think, that he was always on some speed. And so it's gonna bring out a lot of very vibrant energy in you, and it's gonna make you do some things like, I don't know, starting an unwinnable war on two fronts that you actually almost kind of, you were so intense with the whole blitz. He did some of the most insane, just unthinkable stuff, but he did it so well that he almost got away with it. And when I say insane, I don't mean mentally ill. I just mean unthinkable for a normal person.
Illness from someone else's perspective, but as an ex-socialist myself, I can tell you that there is a logic to the socialist faith. If you've not been a socialist, it can be difficult to understand it, and I've struggled to convey this view to my friend Axiom, who was never a socialist, but it does make sense. Maybe I need a dedicated video on trying to explain how a socialist sees the world, to a non-socialist. Maybe that's something I can do, but there is a logic there. But I don't think mental illness is enough by itself. I'm not saying there was no mental illness, or that it doesn't look like mental illness, but that mental illness is probably a symptom, not the cause. The lives of the socialists I showed all had a loss of faith and parental issues, an altruistic morality, and a rebellious streak manifesting as a fear of independence, laziness, and a desire to be taken care of. They then lashed out at the world for not being the type of world where they could mope around all day doing nothing. That may look like mental illness from an outsider's perspective, but we can logically see the pattern that made them come to that conclusion. So, at worst, mental illness is a symptom, not...
Yeah, when you don't have a very kind of competitive, greedy, avaricious spirit, the world can be very demoralizing for a lot of people. And I think those are the people who are much more likely to reject what the capitalist system has to offer and look for alternatives, and to want a more kind of altruistic society. And so, yeah, you can frame it from in the way that TIK just framed it, or you can frame it the way I framed it. Depending on which language you use, it's going to sound different. But we're essentially talking about the same thing.
Not the cause. To be honest, I think you're an excellent historian, but a terrible psychologist. The common denominator I find
I don't know about excellent
is narcissistic
historian.
Personality disorder. Every socialist, from the useful idiots and tankies on 4chan and Reddit to Mao and Stalin, seems to be very narcissistic. In fact, socialism itself seems to be a narcissistic pathology codified into a Gnostic theology.
Yeah, this Gnostic connection is something that TIK is interested in, and I've seen people criticize him for that. It seems like he doesn't understand Gnosticism or socialism very well, and he conflates them again as part of this very kind of radicalized propagandistic kick that he's on. But it seems like this person has kind of been a follower of him and is using his language now.
Right, maybe they do have narcissistic personality disorder, but what caused it? Could it not be that their altruistic upbringing, coupled with parental issues and all the other factors identified in the pattern, led to a narcissistic personality disorder? Or is narcissistic personality disorder the cause of all that? Again, as an ex-socialist who still has low self-esteem, hence why I bought Brandon's book, I don't think narcissism is correct. It may look like narcissism to outsiders, but I think it would be a symptom, not a cause. Another criticism was that Lutheran wasn't to blame.
What?
People thought that I was attacking Lutheranism specifically because the first four socialists in the video were Lutherans. But I wasn't. Mao and Pol Pot
I've never heard of Lutheranism. Lutheranism? I've heard of Lutheranism. I've never heard of Lutheranism.
Were Buddhists, not Christians. And others on the list weren't Lutheran either. It's just a bit of a funny coincidence that the first four were from a Lutheran background, while Lenin being a mixture of Lutheran and Eastern Orthodox. I think it's actually nothing to do with a specific religion. And, if you got offended by my supposed attack on Lutheranism, you've identified demons that don't exist.
Lutheranism.
This leads us to the criticism that everyone was religious back then, so religion doesn't explain it. The problem with that is that due to the Enlightenment and the Scientific Revolution, as well as the Industrial Revolution and the rise of the concept of liberty and free markets, we actually see a loss of faith in the traditional religions. Even if people didn't become atheists, religion started to lose its grip on people's outlook and lives. And in this instance, every single one of these socialists lost their faith in the mainstream religions and became atheists, supposedly. I say supposedly because socialism is itself a religion, but they didn't seem to realise this and class themselves as atheists. So the criticism that said...
It's just... He just says stuff like that. Like, socialism is a religion. And I'm sorry, but, like, how can you think of yourself as an honest, socio-political analyst when you're saying stuff like that is just clearly incendiary and clearly trying to, put... So I guess make a conflation between two things instead of just a comparison. Like, yeah, make a comparison. That's fine enough, but don't make a conflation. That's where the issue comes in, and I think he struggles with that, where he thinks that he's just making a comparison when he's actually making a conflation. Or he thinks that it's appropriate to make a conflation when it's very much not. And it gets him in a lot of trouble because, like, it's just a dick move, and it's not not very academically rigorous. It's not very logically sound. It's very messy. It's very dirty. It's very motivated, and it raises huge red flags.
As well, everyone was religious back then, so religion can't explain it, has missed the point that it was the loss of faith in the mainstream religion that was the factor being discussed, not the fact that everyone was religious. And this leads to our discussion about altruism and Christianity specifically. So,
I kind of feel him on this because it sounds like those people were being very dense and not understanding the point he was making. I don't know. I think I usually do a pretty good job of understanding the points that he's making, even though I disagree with them quite often. But there's this common just disease on the internet, and I think he's a part of this because I think he does this too, where he just where people just can't analyze anything. That's something that my dad emailed me about a while back. He says that there's this rampant epidemic of people just failing to be able to analyze anything. And it's true, because it's just, and we see this that's kind of why I keep pulling these has-been hotel videos, because the ones that I've looked at so far keep doing this, just missing important details and making things up and just totally distorting what the show is communicating into something that it's not communicating. I just wish that people would be a little bit more conscientious when they say stuff and try at least to understand each other a little bit better.
But the pattern I identified said that these people started off in a mainstream religion, but then...
Let's see, we have some Lutheran communities have supported social reforms and welfare policies that align with some aspects of socialism, most notably in Scandinavian countries. That's what he brought up, Lutherans maybe. Well, I think he's also saying that a lot of these socialists' lives he looked at, they happened to come from Lutheran backgrounds, but they found that Lutheranism didn't actually satisfy them in the end and looked elsewhere.
Then,
which kind of gets to what I was talking about in my Why I Admire Fascism video, about how fascism offered itself up as a secular alternative to religion while not being a replacement for religion.
Due to parental issues and poor schooling, had a rebellious nature and lost their faith in the mainstream religion. However, they retained the altruistic morality that they had adopted from the mainstream religion and took that into...
Yeah, so it would be that Lutheran morality that you're talking about.
The faith of socialism. Well, to counter this, some Christians argued that Christianity isn't about altruism or self-sacrifice. And I've got to say that when I read that, I was absolutely astonished that Christians would make this argument.
Christians who watch TIK's videos might make that argument. You can interpret Christianity in whichever way you want. But usually and traditionally, altruism and humility are considered very esteemed virtues in Christianity. And people who pretend that they aren't are just ignoring history, I think.
Of course, we know why they now were making this argument. They're wrongly perceiving my video as an attack on Christianity, which it wasn't. And so they defended it by accusing me of not knowing what Christian doctrine is. But this is a tactical blunder on their part, not least because...
It's so weird being on TIK's side now. I expected to watch this video and just make fun of it the way I did with his last one. But it's funny because he's doing the same thing that he did in the last one I responded to. And yet in this one, I'm on his side and I'm against the people who are criticizing him. Which is, it's weird that I'm finding myself in this position because I'm not used to this.
Because I wasn't attacking Christianity at all, but also because there's no denying that altruism or self-sacrifice is inherent within the faith. Charity is a virtue, is it not? You must devote your entire life to God, do you not? These are the manifestations of altruism and self-sacrifice. Let's read from a Christian website that discusses this issue. Service to others is a pillar of Christianity. Well, that's it then. Done. End of discussion. But of course they won't be satisfied with this, so let's continue. Jesus taught that helping those in need was one of the most important aspects of life for just about anyone. Jesus went as far as to suggest that people should help others as much as possible. For example, Jesus praised those who would give so much to the poor that they themselves became poor. With such strong emphasis on helping till it hurts in the New Testament, one would expect to see Christians today putting altruism, or producing a positive change in the world, at the forefront of their lives. For whatever reason, this is seldom the case. The level of philanthropy and volunteerism among Christians is approximately the same as among secular people. Christians today focus on other aspects of following Christ, such as attending church and gaining converts.
I think the reason is that Christianity is just the established norm, and it's become so normal that nobody takes it seriously anymore. They performatively take it seriously as a way of kind of fitting into the society around them and finding this sort of social lever that they can use to do essentially secular goals and advance themselves in an essentially secular way. But most people who are serious Christians don't actually take the sort of historically understood message of Christianity very seriously, because it's not for them about the spirituality at all. It's really just about the secular kind of one-upsmanship. And so that's the kind of big irony of Christianity, is that, you know, once it becomes the status quo, it loses its actual power to affect people. That's the weird thing. Once it gains power, it loses its mystique and it loses its charm. And it just becomes, you know, background noise like anything else. And so people stop paying attention to it.
While often dismissing Christ's teachings that each of us should put in a major effort to help our fellow humans. Why is this so? And then it goes on to discuss this, which I'm not going to get into. But here's another website that references the Bible saying the same thing. What does the Bible say about altruism? Altruism is an unselfish concern for the welfare of others. An altruistic person gives generously of time and resources for no personal gain, and often at personal risk. A major theme of the Bible is godly altruism. As far back as the Mosaic Law, the Bible records God's desire that his people care for the widows, the orphans, and the poor in their communities. And here's some Bible passages. In the New Testament, James 1:27 says, "Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world." Altruism is taught throughout scriptures in a variety of ways. First, God commanded that his people love your neighbour as yourself. Then, Jesus modelled altruism during his years on earth. And the New Testament writers echoed that theme by urging Christians to do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but with humility of mind, regard one another as more important than yourselves. Do not merely look out for your own personal interests, but also for the interests of others. Paul explained that Christians must learn to devote themselves to doing what is good in order to provide for urgent needs and not live unproductive lives. And it keeps going. So to say that there's no altruism or self-sacrifice in the Christian faith is, quite frankly, a baffling assertion. And it was Christians making this point.
I agree
However,
with this.
I can see why there's a misunderstanding here, as this commenter said. Christianity doesn't actually include the denigration of the self, but more of an equal consideration. After all, it is love thy neighbour as thyself, and not love him more than you do yourself. No, let me...
Who ever said that it's love your neighbor more than yourself? I don't think TIK actually said that.
Read that passage again. Regard one another as more important than yourselves.
Oh, well, he's saying it here, I guess.
Regard one another as more important than yourselves. That's a very clear instruction in the Bible.
Well, I guess this person is wrong then. It does say that in the Bible. And I guess I was wrong. TIK does believe that.
Also just a whole lot that's directly incompatible with the ideas of secular altruism too. Like, you're not supposed to compel people to give, but if you don't, you'll go to hell. And you should be quiet as you give to charity, or you'll burn in eternal fire. And
yeah, I mean, everything about Christianity doesn't make sense when you bring hell into the picture.
As somebody else said in response, the Bible has conflicting instructions. There is the golden rule, but then there are other passages where it does go full altruist and teaches extreme self-loathing. But the critics say that there's no self-loathing or self-hatred in Christianity. Yet I'm not the only one to identify it. We'll come back to this shortly. However, sticking...
Man, he's taking such a... Like, that what that commenter said, that the Bible has conflicting instructions. I mean, you can say that about so many different ideologies, including socialism. Socialism has conflicting instructions. I mean, that's a very universal thing. Everything, I think, has hypocrisy and conflicting instructions. And I think if TIK understood that better, then he would be a better analyst. I wish he would take that idea to heart.
There's no self-sacrifice. Well, let's just read these comments. Judaism's attitude to altruism isn't the same as Christianity. While charity is encouraged, self-immolation for the sake of others is forbidden. The person responding said, it's also forbidden in actual Christianity. Unfortunately, TIK, as good as he is, hasn't studied.
I don't agree with the practice of blotting out the person's screen name when making a video responding to criticism. I think you should just blast that screen name out there. They get what they get, you know?
The subject enough. I have studied it, and I do understand it, so let me clarify for you.
Every ism is
As
tinged
Ayn Rand
with conflicting
points out,
instructions.
To be fully altruistic, you must.
Yeah, and so when people reduce them, like the way TIK does, it's very frustrating. Like, you don't have to agree with socialism to understand it's a complex ideology. So why on earth does he insist on not understanding that? It's weird, because you watch a video like this and it actually does seem like he has a certain amount of intelligence and ability to discern. He has discretion. And it's just, why is he so selective in using it? I don't get it.
Offer yourself up as a meal to the cannibals, like a sacrificial animal, led like a lamb to the slaughter in silence and shame. However, while Christianity is the attempt at making altruism a reality, the authors of the Bible realized that it was unrealistic to expect their followers to be fully altruistic, since they themselves couldn't live that way. People need to eat. You can't give away all your food to charity, otherwise you would starve. So this is where the contradictions start. Christianity is built upon altruism, but they had to place limits upon it. They say, yes, you must sacrifice for others, but only up to a point. And what they did was they put an artificial limit on the altruist doctrine. The idea became that you would only eat just enough to sustain yourself and no more.
That's the same exact thing as the Buddhist middle way.
Then you would give the rest to others. It wasn't that Christianity doesn't encourage guilt, altruism or self-sacrifice, but rather that these elements are tempered by the idea of a loving God, and that once removed from that loving God, they become unbearable. And that is precisely my point. A Christian is taught to feel guilt and shame, is taught to be altruistic and self-sacrificial, but only to a point. Because the love of...
This guy reminds me quite a lot of Rob Ager, who is actually a YouTuber I admire greatly. He's also kind of a right-wing guy. He's a UKIP supporter. But I really love... But he doesn't agree with the whole left-right way of even talking about politics, so I don't think he would accept the label right-wing. But he makes great videos about movies and analyzing the subtext in movies. And he has a very similar voice because he's from Liverpool. I don't know where TIK is from. He sounds like he's somewhere in that Manchester, Liverpool area, but he's obviously not a really thick Scouser. And he's also not quite as Mancunian as Carl Pilkington, who I kind of have in my mind as the the gold standard of what a Manchester accent sounds like. So I'd be curious to know what place he's from.
God and Jesus will save you.
But he has a somewhat similar speaking pattern to Rob Ager. I think Rob Ager's speech is maybe a little bit more pleasant to listen to than his, but it's very similar in their intonation and everything.
However, if someone who was Christian loses the faith, that love of God and Jesus goes away. So you're left with the guilt, the shame, the altruism, and the self-sacrificial elements without any way of your sins being forgiven. The only solution, therefore, is for society to become your new God. And that's precisely where socialism comes in. The revolution is Judgment Day, and the communist utopia is heaven on earth, hence the title of one of the books that I've been reading. But this is where yet another criticism came in.
There are definitely a lot of comparisons you can make between socialism and Christianity.
Christians, specifically Catholics, were arguing that Christianity is not about self-hatred. Well, the central idea of Christianity is that, by their nature, men are flawed, evil, sinful creatures who, if left to their own devices, would devour each other like a swarm of rats.
Very Hobbesian.
These people are, by default, destined to go to hell. However, there is a saviour figure, Jesus Christ, who dies on the cross for your sins,
for no reason, because if Jesus is God, then Jesus could just decide to not die on the cross and just forgive people anyway, and it would functionally make no fucking difference whatsoever. Like, him dying didn't do shit. So it's the weirdest thing. It's clearly like someone must have died on a cross at some point, or they had some sort of myth about a guy dying on a cross. And then they had to somehow figure out a reason for why this was like a sacrifice that benefited everyone. But it didn't do, like, there's no logic to it at all. This is something that has never made any sense to me. And Christians talk about it like, oh yeah, it makes total sense. He died for our sins. But what does that even mean? Like, what the fuck are you even talking about when you say that?
or yourself. Therefore, your inherent sinful nature will be forgiven. Not overcome, just forgiven. If you put your faith in Jesus, at which point you will go to heaven. So, self-hatred is there, right in the middle of it all. This is the fundamental element at the heart of the doctrine of Christianity. And denying that is simply impossible. If it wasn't about self-hatred, you would not need to be saved. Like, think about it. What are you being saved from? You're being saved from yourself. If you did not hate yourself and believe that you were a bad, sinful person, you would have no reason to need Jesus. The original sin is that you are inherently a bad person. From Christianity.com. In essence, we are born with a sinful nature because of Adam. From our infancy, we have a tendency to choose selfishness and our own interests over the interests of others.
Why Adam? Why not Eve? Wasn't Eve the one who did it first? Shouldn't we have inherited our sinful nature from Eve?
The original sin of Adam has caused every human to be born with original sin, except for Jesus, who was born of a virgin. Although we may say, that's not fair, if I was in Adam's shoes I wouldn't have sinned, but I think we can analyse our own actions in life and understand we probably would have messed up in a similar way to what he did. What are the consequences of original sin? According to St. George Greek Orthodox Cathedral, one of the first consequences was that they, Adam and Eve, became embarrassed, that they were naked and they covered themselves with fig leaves.
Grade A Under A made a really funny video recently about this. I gotta pull up that part of the video because it was hilarious. I've been kind of enjoying Grade A Under A's new videos lately.
Innit? Anyways, this part makes no sense, right? But eating this fruit somehow made them realise that they shouldn't be naked. What? Yeah, mate, who needs school when you can just eat fruit? And they're now ashamed of their nakedness. So then they're like, oh shit, mate, I'm naked. Sucks, innit? I need to cover up my tits and my bits and my dick and my balls. So they make some clothes from fig leaves, right? And cover up their nakedness. And they also bought some Yeezys as well, right? Because they have bad taste. So God then comes back, right? From where? I've got no f***ing idea, right? I'd like to know. But anyways, God comes back from wherever he's gone, right? And he sees the shitty clothes and sneakers they're wearing, and he's pissed. Because, and I'm not joking, right? He's mad that they're not naked anymore. They fucking pervert! Mate, I was right about what I said before, mate. Like, look for yourselves. He's just mad that they're not naked anymore. Like, God doesn't give a shit that they eat his fruit, right? God's just mad that his free peep show has come to an abrupt end. So God is mad at...
That's really funny.
They were no longer focused on God, but were now self-centered in their bodies. Their soul was no longer in communion with
Tesco's.
God. Their bodily appetites took charge, and they became ashamed because of their lack of clothing.
And I've been thinking about this lately, because I've been thinking about the prospect of God being a character in Has Been Hotel. And God in the Bible, if you actually read the Bible, God is clearly not omniscient. And he seems to not be very omnipotent either. He clearly seems to have limitations. And that's a very important example is in Genesis. He's just walking around in the garden and he just comes across them and he's surprised. Now, if God were omniscient, he wouldn't be surprised by anything. And if God knows everything, then he would know the future and what's going to happen. And so everything, therefore, is his fault. So the whole idea of omniscience and omnipotence never made any sense. It never should have been a part of theology. I don't know why anybody adopted that into their theology, except for like Hindus who are into the whole Advaita stuff and whatnot. I can understand them having like omniscience in their theology because they have a very kind of detached and also in some ways not very detached view of God. It gets very kind of heady and philosophical. But when it comes to just writing literature about God as if he's a guy, like in Genesis, I don't know how you can base a religion off of that kind of literature and then come to the conclusion that God is omniscient and omnipotent when that defies everything that's actually written in the book that you consecrate as some holy source of wisdom. Like, if the fucking book portrays him as a guy who doesn't know everything and can't do everything, then why do you constantly claim that he is otherwise? It just creates a bunch of paradoxes for no reason. It's totally illogical, totally stupid. Probably one of the bigger mistakes in theology, if I were to say.
They began the passionate earthly life that we all now participate in. Mankind still had the image of God, but it was now tarnished or dimmed. Their bodies became subject to sickness, corruption, and death. The garden with the tree of life was no longer accessible for them. This is the status we inherit from Adam and Eve. This is what we call ancestral sin. We do not obtain the blame for the bad choice that Adam made, but we inherit the consequence of his sinfulness, the change in nature he underwent. Since we are all descendants of Adam and Eve, we all acquire their sinful nature that resulted from the fall. So we are inherently bad. We are not good. And implicit in this is a self-hatred. self-hatred, a self-loathing. But the Christian doctrine says Jesus saves us from this self-hatred. Biblically speaking, we know we are sinners who are separated from God. There is a standard that we will have failed to live up to and will never be able to live up to on our own. Apart from God, we are without hope. But this is not cause to hate ourselves. Oh really? This sentence is in there? Because that's what people are doing. They realize that they have original sin. They therefore conclude a self-hatred. And the authors are responding to that conclusion by saying, no, it's not cause to hate ourselves. Rather, it is cause to turn to God and rely on His grace. He has made a way to salvation. God created humanity in His image. He loves us, and we reflect Him. Though sin marred His image, God did not abandon us. Instead, He sent His Son, Jesus, who, though remaining fully...
Yeah, and if God is omniscient and omnipotent, then God intentionally made it so that sin would mar His image. Which doesn't make any sense. If He's supposed to not like this, then why did He make it that way? Just to make Himself suffer? I mean, you could argue that. You could argue that existence requires suffering in order to be interesting, because otherwise it would create its own form of suffering called boredom. But, I don't know.
God took on human's flesh. Jesus lived a perfect life. He then died to pay the penalty for our sin, and He rose again to prove His victory over sin and death. All who put their faith in Him are saved. This is cause for great rejoicing. When we become a redeemed child of God, there is no reason to hate ourselves. Yes, but here's the problem. If you lose your faith, but retain the altruism, you can no longer be saved. You're left with self-hatred and no way to get out of it. This was the point I was trying to make. My critics took my video as an attack upon Christianity, specifically Lutheranism, but they missed the mark here. I made it clear that the loss of faith, emphasis on loss, left these people who had parental issues with an altruistic morality system with no...
By the way, the last comment on my last TIKHistory video had a thread that I was following, and at some point, this guy this guy was like trying to he was trying to defend TIK's sort of semantical arguments. And eventually I was just like, well, let's get to the point here, which is that all of this, I don't care about the semantics. What I care about is that they're being used to justify an erroneous position that socialism is about nothing other than government control. And so this guy was like, well, point me to one example of that. And so I was like, okay, how about Pierre-Joseph Proudhon and mutualism? And then he responded, Proudhon was an anarchist and not a socialist. And then I responded, well, yeah, but anarchism is a branch off of socialism. And then he was like, no, anarchism and socialism developed at the same time, but they're not the same. And I was like, no, they are the same and were the same. And the whole issue of the First International was about whether socialism should follow the anarchist model or the Marxist model. And he still wasn't getting it. So he was like, can you show me any way that you can possibly interpret Proudhon as a socialist? And so I was like, okay, and I just straight up quoted the mutualism Wikipedia page. I was just like, here's the introduction to the mutualism Wikipedia page. And you read it and it's like, oh, okay, this cannot be interpreted as anything other than socialism. And then the dude didn't respond after that. He didn't respond back. It was like I just totally ended him just by doing the most basic level of research, which just astonishes me because I don't know how he could have gotten that far in the conversation and did not figured out that he was going to get stumped if he kept going down that road. You know, like if he didn't even do enough research to know what even anything about Pierre-Joseph Proudhon or mutualism, I short-circuited his brain by doing nothing. All I did was show him like the first Google search result of what we were talking about, and that somehow was enough to destroy him. I just, it's like, man, how can people be so unprepared for discourse that it only takes that much to just blow them down? Because he was so confident. He was like, how on earth can you possibly say that Proudhon was a socialist? And I was like, just go to his Wikipedia page, read the first fucking paragraph. It says he's a socialist. He didn't have anything to say to that. Like, what on earth was he thinking getting into that conversation? I don't understand some people, man.
No way to save themselves from self-hatred. Every single one of these socialists was brought up in a religious household or school or monastery and subsequently lost the faith. It's the loss of faith, but the retention of the altruistic morality and self-hatred that is important. This is why it applies to Mao and Pol Pot as well, even though they're not Christian. But let's just back up a second. Adam and Eve sinned and fell from God's grace. They were no longer focused on God, but were self-centered in their bodies, that were hungry and,
He should start a second channel called TIK Theology.
began a passionate earthly life and covered themselves in material things to protect their nakedness. They were corrupt, sick, and could succumb to death, and this was the ancestral sin. So we once lived in communion with God, communism with God, but we sinned and descended into several stages of history where we ended up in capitalism. But don't worry, the revolution will come and we will once again be able to get to communism with God. Oh wait, it's Marxism! Now, just like some Christians argued that Christianity wasn't altruist, others argued that socialists are not altruists either. Many of these people were saying that socialists are narcissists, not altruists. So let me read from one of these comments. None of the socialist leaders were altruistic. Altruism is voluntarily being in the service of others. It does not mean hating the material world, and it does not involve force. I would argue that they had a God complex and wanted to force a bad version of altruism on everybody else. They were self-serving to the core. Well, as I replied to him, you cannot be a socialist without being altruistic. Socialism requires altruism, since the equality principle is based upon it. Altruism is all about helping others. The question is, why are others in need of help? Because the system, capitalism, is bad. Material reality does not provide equality, and thus material reality is bad, and we must overcome it by coming together and helping our fellow men via the collective, the state. Thus, altruism is against material reality, nature, and the free market. This is the reason they blame others, like you said.
It's really interesting to see TIK defend socialism here. Because I do kind of agree somewhat with what the other guy is saying. If we're talking about authoritarian socialists, this idea of the forced, bastardized version of altruism, which is altruism that ends up being entirely self-serving, because it's saying that in the name of altruism, everybody must comply with my orders. So it's very easy to distort the original vision of an ideology in a way which becomes entirely self-serving and narcissistic. And so I think that's happened to a lot of socialists. Not all of them, and not even all of them in the party circles, but just ones like, I don't know, Kim. He's a good example. But it's interesting seeing TIK come out and say you cannot be a socialist without being altruistic. I don't know if I would go that far, but I do think he's on the right track there, talking about the what brings about socialism as opposed to other avenues to gain power and control over people.
They think that men who are left to their own devices will devour each other like a swarm of rats. Therefore, other men are the problem in their eyes. That's why they call for a socialist new man. It's also why they're happy to murder people that they think are not altruistic. If you're not working towards society, you're against it, and therefore evil. Selfishness is evil in their eyes because they don't see how self-interest actually benefits other people. They assume that the selfish person is against society.
Yeah, and this is part of the sort of incongruent nature of right-wing philosophy, of people like Sargon of Akkad, for instance, who we reviewed in our last stream. How they have this this obsession with the selfishness and self-centeredness of secular humanism. But that kind of disdain of selfishness doesn't extend to the economic sphere for them. They still have this idea that selfishness makes sense in economics, but it doesn't otherwise.
And thus, they are justified in killing them. This is the crucial point that people need to understand. The mass murders committed in the 20th century were done in the name of society, supposedly for the benefit of society. By murdering the selfish, greedy, sinful people, you're left with the good people. Those that remain will be the altruists who, now no longer shackled under the chains of selfish capitalism, will be able to form a new utopian society where we'll all help each other and are equal. We will all be in communion with God. Think about what all the socialists say they want. Minimum wages, a social safety net, universal basic income, healthcare that's free, universal at the point of need. They say you've got to contribute to society. You've got to give to others, which is the most altruistic phrase you can possibly come up with. And they're not joking when they say this stuff. They do genuinely want to help others. But they see people who stand in their way as being selfish, evil sinners who must be purged.
Reactionaries, or liberals, as they'll often call them.
In order for their perfect society.
Or just fascists and Nazis. Those are words that the left uses interchangeably. Reactionary, liberal, fascist, and Nazi. All of them mean the same thing to the left.
It's to be realised. Capitalists are, therefore, devils. Free market people are demons. And in the National Socialist sense, the Jews were seen as devils. And
That's why I said in my first fascism video that no ideology is more misunderstood on the left than fascism other than liberalism.
Rats. They want to purge these people to clean up society. The evil that socialists do is done for altruistic reasons. So to say that they're not altruistic is a fundamental misunderstanding of what's going on here. It's poor people who become powerful who want to take the riches and spread the wealth without a true appreciation of how money works. These people are not being altruistic. You're not altruistic when it's not your money. No, it is. Money is the root of all evil, is it not? Money prevents equality. For the altruist, money is the problem. You hoarding money.
Man, this is so smart. He's actually really smart in this video. I'm really impressed with TIK's reasoning in this. Man, like what a huge 180 from the other one we saw. Where in the other one he was just failing to make any kind of a good point. In this, it's like the majority of it is he's really on the money with what he's saying. And he seems to really be understanding the ideology quite sympathetically.
Money is selfish. If you weren't selfish, you'd altruistically give all your money away to those who really need it. Therefore, since you continue to be selfish and greedy, the state should take your money off you and redistribute it to those who truly deserve it. Thus, unlike you, the socialist cares so much about the poor that they're willing to go to any lengths to help them, including.
I think when I put this might be the first entry on my clips channel. I think when I put it on, I'm gonna call it like the redemption of TIKHistory or something like that. Because of course that then intersects with the whole redemption angle of Christianity.
Stealing your wealth from you. Now, obviously, there's a million reasons for why they're wrong, but it's done for altruistic reasons. And this is where I've had difficulty explaining to non-socialists the way that socialists think. My friend Axiom has never been a socialist and couldn't understand why socialists were pro-tax. I had to explain to him that he, the evil capitalist, has got too much money and that his wealth comes at the expense of other people who are, obviously on the street and starving. Therefore, they think that taxation will redistribute the wealth from the rich and give it to the poor, and that this is the right thing to do. Because, no person who has any morals could possibly argue against this, they think. And this is why it's impossible to get through to a socialist. Even I, as an ex-socialist, cannot get through to these people. They think that I've fallen for the devil. Capitalists, they say, are evil, selfish, and sinful creatures. We are the evil people, living devils. So of course they're not going to listen to us. When we're arguing with each other, they truly see you and me as an, absolute evil incarnate. That's why they call you all sorts of names. Nazi, fascist, racist, misogynist, and so on. Right?
That's what we were just saying.
And why they don't listen to anything that you were saying. They don't accept a single point you bring up or accept any evidence you provide because they think you're trying to trick them.
Dude, this is like really good. It's funny, he's flashing the patrons on screen even though there's still like 15 minutes left in the video, 16 minutes left. So that's like a mid-roll thing, I guess, that he's doing. Well, usually people do it at the end.
You have been tricked and are in need of awakening, go woke. If only they could, if only you could see the truth, they think, of course you would pick socialism. Well, no. I am an ex-socialist for a reason. Socialism doesn't work. Altruism is immoral. And yet, they can't see it. And I haven't figured out a way to get through to them. I can't convince them that I'm not evil, or get them to actually listen to what I'm saying, or get them to take in the information being presented.
Yeah, altruism is immoral. That's quite a An intense statement from him right there. Altruism is immoral. That's just one of those kind of, it feels like such cognitive dissonance, doesn't it, to say that altruism is immoral? It's sort of like how, you know, the Ku Klux Klan go around dressing up as ghosts and meeting in these creepy covens at night with surrounding like a big burning idol kind of effigy thingy. And you get to wondering, like, how do these people not see how they look? How do these people not see just how, on the surface, what they're doing is so obviously evil in outward appearance? Never mind any of the kind of nuance. Just, can you look at yourself and see what you look like even? Is that even a skill that you possess? That's kind of how I feel when I hear people say something like altruism is evil. Or immoral, rather. Like, once you start saying something like that, at what point does it occur to you, hey, maybe I've gone a bit too far. Maybe my line of logic has taken me in a strange place and I should reassess.
Presented. I can't get them to understand. And honestly, this is a big reason why I'm burnt out.
Let's see, Ray C says, I'm not in the know about this guy. I think I remember you having a take on him which was more critical, and here he's making much more sense. Yeah, pretty much. His videos, well, I reacted to 3 of his videos in the past, and each one progressively got worse than the last, until the last one was so awful that I titled my reaction to it something like TIKHistory, non-stop total failure of human intellect. And it was a remarkably awful video. And then he makes this one, which is more recent than that one. This is a pretty recent video. And it's actually not bad. I'm actually liking it for the most part.
I just think, what's the point? The altruist morality that I still have from my socialist days says that I should help these people. And yet I can't. They won't listen. So I'm having to accept the grim reality that these people can't be helped, and that they must be left to rot in the gutter.
Another example is when Vegan Gains debated Destiny, and he got Destiny to admit that in his moral code it's perfectly okay to skin a dog alive. And when Destiny was admitting to that, he kind of sighed and reluctantly accepted that as true, which really just demonstrated that Destiny wasn't even comfortable with his own morals. So why was he believing them, is the question.
Than help these people, I think, well, I may as well just look after myself and be selfish.
Before
and although
my
that's
vacation
against
trip,
my nature, I have no choice, because it's driving me up the wall. And that's why I'm reading Rand.
Before my vacation trip was when I made the reaction to his Hitler socialism video. But then after that, I did my reaction to his socialism, his other socialism video about the definition of socialism.
And all this is a difficult red pill truth to swallow. And just to round off this point, listen to this next comment I got from someone who thinks that altruism is the good morality system. versus the supposed evil and sinful morality system of selfishness. Listen to the complete misunderstanding of what self-interest is actually about. This video is identical to the Nietzschean Randian Evolan polemic against religion only applied to communism as a religion. It's not too hard to find full rebuttals to those arguments, and I don't have the patience to make one here. I'd just like to point out one thing. The self-hatred TIK mentions as stemming from altruism is nothing more than the justified inadequacy one feels when they don't live up to moral principles. Any system of ethics, bar one, is going to create situations where people experience self-hatred, because that's called a conscience. Do what thou wilt is the only moral code which does not create self-hatred by default, because it's the only one that's virtuous. Indeed, the same criticisms of ethical principles TIK and his ideological forebears levy at
TIKHistory is an Aleister Crowley fan.
Altruism. People who want to overeat and abuse drugs and cheat on their partners levy at health standards and monogamy respectfully. The argument is the same because the goal is the same. A denial of virtue, whether in whole or in part. Striving for the ideals of virtue does not make a person blind to reality. Well, it does in this case. Far from it. It equips one to live in the Platonic world of forms, with all its cruelties, with dignity and satisfaction through self-immolation. The denial of altruism or any other virtue only ever leads to sickness and misery. So apparently, we just want to overeat. Obviously. Abuse.
Ray C says, sorry, it was 4 a.m. here, and I might have the timeliness, I assume you mean timelines, mixed up. Perhaps he heard some honest criticism from his usual Patreon audience and did logic research in his own head for this comeback. I don't think so, because I think he's just restating what he said in his previous video about this subject concerning pattern in all socialist childhoods. If I were to guess, I would say that the video that this is following up on said pretty much the same thing he's saying here. I actually think that he's probably totally in the right, and I think probably any criticism he got on that video, from what I can see here, any criticism he got on that video was probably quite misguided. Which, of course, isn't really a surprise for YouTube, because YouTube is full of people who can't analyze anything. But it is a little bit of a surprise, and a welcome surprise for TIKHistory.
Drugs, which I've never done, cheat on our partners, which I do all the time apparently, and live unvirtuously. I mean, it's complete nonsense. Not only has he no idea what our views are, but he is totally off the mark. Rather than the denial of altruism leading to sickness and misery, I'd argue that altruism is the cause of sickness and misery. Altruism is the denial of the self, therefore leading to self-hatred, low self-esteem, and a lack of self-confidence, and a lack of conscience.
Man, it's just I think it's fine if you want to promote some self-centered values. But I think people always make a mistake when they start promoting one ideology or one set of values without looking at the counter-argument sympathetically, without looking at the other side sympathetically, and also finding things to agree with in the opposition. I just think that it always seems to hold true that whenever you believe in something, usually that belief is misguided, which is why I'm against belief and why I'm a nihilist. I just think that this this whole believing in certain moral values at the expense of others in this way, saying, yes, selfishness is the real virtue and altruism is the real sin. You're not really correcting the mistake of altruism, and you're not really doing a great job at defending selfishness. You're really just committing the exact same mistake, but in the opposite direction.
This manifests as a host of problems such as laziness, bipolar personality disorders, anxiety, depression, poverty, indebtedness, arrogance, malevolence, unearned pride in our spirituality, envy, wrath, the list goes on. But there's no way that I can possibly get through to this person. So I'm not even going to try. Instead, I'll limit my response to just 2 words. Stay ignorant. But this then leads to the criticism that
I'll limit my response to just 2 words. Sputnik.
Down the Ayn Rand rabbit hole. Bearing in mind that I was a socialist who fell from the faith in 2019 and learnt actual economics, then only started reading Ayn Rand in the last few months or so. So to say that I've gone down the Ayn Rand rabbit hole is a bit much. I haven't actually read that much about her yet, and I came to the conclusion that altruism was bad before I read her. In fact, that's the reason I finally decided to start reading her. That and the fact that I read Leonard Peiko's book, The Cause of Hitler's Germany, which is fantastic. I realised a while back that everything that my teachers had taught me was wrong. I realised that what the media told me, what society preaches, and what a lot of the culture I grew up in said was all wrong. The amount of times that I came across evidence and other truths that challenged and contradicted what I had been told gradually changed my view of the way that things were. And realising the truth that Hitler hadn't just put socialism in the name to trick the workers, that he was actually a socialist, caused me to lose the faith in socialism. And then, after taking the economic and political red pill, I then took the relationship red pill a couple of years later. And it's from these truths... Then took the relationship red pill a couple of years later. The economic and political red pill, I then took the relationship red pill a couple of years later. And
So, he said that he struggles with self-esteem issues. Which, of course, is a thing that leads a lot of people to socialism. But he's turned away from socialism. He's a capitalist now, and a free market capitalist at that. He is a selfish capitalist. And I don't mean that in a disparaging way. I mean that just in an objective way. His ideology is selfish. But that hasn't cured him of his self-esteem issues. And he's adopted this sort of relationship red pill ideology, which of course is wrapped up in the whole self-interested philosophy. Because it's saying basically the line from Frankie and Valley in the Four Seasons, "No woman's worth crawling on the earth." No woman's worth crawling on the earth. Walk like a man. Walk as an independent man. A man out for his own interests. But I think that this is an overcompensation on his part. And I think eventually he might come to realize that the answer he was looking for isn't in this sort of libertarian philosophy either. But I don't know what it will take to get him to that point. He said that he became disenchanted with socialism when he found out that Hitler was a socialist. If it is indeed true that you can call Hitler a socialist, which I kind of have a suspicion that it is. But it's a controversial topic. But if that's all it took him to kind of lose faith in socialism, then I wonder what it's going to take for him to lose faith in libertarianism. Like, what could come in? What I guess my curiosity here is, what could possibly come in to change his view on this topic so late in life? Because I assume he's in his 30s. What could it be at this point? Because I do kind of want to help this guy now. I do kind of want him to see the traps that he's still falling into at this point. But just how to do that, I'm not so sure.
It's from these truths and a lot of other, further study and work that I gradually realized that altruism was a major problem that I would have to overcome myself. And it was at that point that I picked up Ayn Rand's The Virtue of Selfishness. And I wish I had done so earlier. I wish I hadn't listened to the critics. They accused me of reading Mises and Rothbard and Ayn Rand when I hadn't. And then when I picked up Mises and Rothbard, I realised that, this is why they had told me not to read them. Well, the same thing applies with Ayn Rand. These critics have built their lives around lies, refusing to see past whatever the lamestream media tells them. Well, Ayn Rand drives a stake straight through the heart of this nonsense, exposing the lies for what they are. They don't like this, and so we see personal attacks against her.
Hi, Tik. Just so you know, Rand practiced absolutely nothing that she preached. Nothing. Lived out her last days thanks to the altruism of others. Well, I hope you make a better...
Well, you can make an argument that as a self-interested person, she was merely taking advantage of the altruism of others. It's very much like in Snake Eyes and Sissies, where you have the independent man who is totally dependent on other people, which is, of course, a paradox. But it makes sense because... if she is acting in self-interest and she doesn't want to work and she just wants to rely on welfare and live in a boarding house, then as a self-interested woman, that's her right to do so if that's the thing that she thinks is most helpful for her. She's not saying that these systems that she relies on have a moral necessity of existing and that other people should be creating them for her benefit. But if she's merely taking advantage of them for her benefit, well, then that's totally in line with her philosophy. So I wouldn't agree with this guy at all.
Objectivist than her. Easy on the declarations, Tiger. Had she earned the love and respect of others, or did she not work for it and expect it all the same? She was an anarcho-capitalist that ended up applying for social security. Tik will die.
Yeah, but like, it's just because you take advantage of a system doesn't mean that you think that people are right for creating it. And I don't think it necessarily makes you a hypocrite either in this case. Because there is no morality in selfishness. It's kind of an anti-morality. And so if your morality is anti-morality, then what do these sort of symbolic things amount to in the end? Nothing of value. Where's the hard currency in that? And of course, Tik replies she isn't an anarcho-capitalist.
digest and explain that one, objectively of course. Rules for thee, but not for me. Well, no, Ayn Rand wasn't an anarcho-capitalist.
The fact that you think she was an anarcho-capitalist is proof that you have zero idea of what you're talking about. Ayn Rand wasn't an ANCAP and she wasn't a libertarian. So she can use the state services if she wants to, and that's not against her philosophy. In fact, that's why the ANCAPs disagree with her on this, because they think she wasn't being consistent. Which is an argument that I'm not wading into here.
But what did she believe in if she wasn't a libertarian? I thought that was her whole thing, that she was a libertarian.
But this is why your argument makes no sense. You're assuming things...
I think I even used her picture in a video, in a Manson video. It was Snake Eyes and Sissies. It was about that song. I used her picture saying, you know how libertarians talk about the non-aggression principle? Well, this is the aggression principle. I mean, isn't the non-aggression principle... I always assumed that was... that Ayn Rand was a libertarian, but I guess if she isn't, then maybe she didn't believe in the non-aggression principle. And I just used that picture for no reason.
About her that are not true, and you're doing so out of ignorance, based on what you've heard some moron say on Reddit, or maybe you've been listening to Jordan Peterson's take on Ayn Rand, which is also wrong. He doesn't understand her philosophy at all, yet claims...
Yeah, that's not a surprise. I'm glad to see him criticizing Jordan Peterson.
He has read Atlas Shrugged several times, even though it's obvious that he hasn't. And it's clear that you haven't either.
Yeah, just like he's read the Communist Manifesto several times.
Ayn Rand also barely worked in her life and spent her last years in social housing on full government support. Well, again, this isn't a valid argument. But when pushed for further comment, he explains, in 1976 she retired from her newsletter and despite her lifelong objections to any government-run program, was enrolled in and subsequently claimed Social Security and Medicare government assistance with the aid of a social worker. And as one commenter replied, so she claimed money that she had paid for her entire life. It's ridiculous.
That's such a good
you
point.
would think that was a violation of her moral principles. Integrity does not require that you passively take punches delivered at you because you are against punching and being punched. Later, someone else brings up another good point. A person paying taxes all their life, taking advantage of government assistance in old age, is not stealing.
I would like to have a free market. But I'm not in a free market. I'm forced to pay taxes for things that I don't want nor need. I'm forced to pay for government potholes. Forced to pay and therefore use a national social...
Yeah, TIK wants to live in a city where the roads are just covered with potholes and you can't get around anywhere without ruining the suspension on your car.
This health service, and I'm forced to pay for the Play-Dohs in Parliament and then spoil my ballot in the face of a non-existent choice at the poll.
Yeah, he calls them Play-Dohs again, like with the last video we covered. That's a thing. That's a term that he uses frequently.
I don't want to have these things, but I have no choice. I have paid into the NHS and therefore will have to use the NHS. But I wish I had the freedom to spend my money on a different service. There's no contradiction there, because in a free society, I'd absolutely put my money where my mouth is. We just don't...
Ayn Rand had one signal philosophical difference with libertarian, and that was concerning ethics. She explicitly rejected altruism. Libertarianism still accepts voluntary altruism. Oh, okay. So in all other ways, she was a libertarian? See, that to me doesn't... If that's your only difference with libertarianism, then I don't think that makes you not a libertarian. You just have a different kind of ethical code. which is totally up to you because libertarianism is about making things up to the individual. So that's totally consistent with libertarianism in my mind.
Don't live in a free society, and so I can't. And this common attack on Ayn Rand is the same. It just doesn't make any sense. If the government of Venezuela made petrol free, which they did at one point, you'd be stupid not to fill up your tank. Similarly, if the US government offers social security at a cheaper price than the market can due to the fact that they're stealing off the taxpayer, Ayn Rand would be wrong not to use that.
Ayn Rand was a
But
libertarian.
this doesn't mean she wouldn't have preferred a society where the government stayed out of the market. Yet, this is the argument people make.
Ayn Rand's philosophy is the purest of all evils, and even surpasses National Socialism. So I wonder what your own psychological issues might be. My psychological issues lie in reading stupid comments like these. I agree, man. Ayn Rand's philosophy is that helping others is morally wrong, and you should be a self-centered rear end 24/7, worship the rich. It's not just libertarian, it's insane.
Ayn Rand wasn't a libertarian. She didn't like libertarians, and she didn't say it was morally wrong to help others. That is a blatant lie. She never said you should be a rear end who only worships the rich. This is all an ignorant and complete misunderstanding of what she was actually saying. And I've only just started reading her works, and I've not read that much about her yet. Yet, even a casual glance at her works will show you that what you're spouting here is a complete lie.
I would like to know why he thinks Ayn Rand isn't a libertarian. What about her is not libertarian?
And my question to you is, what are you scared of? Are you not capable of reading views that are contradictory to your own? Well, I know that you are, because you can't even listen to mine. If you think that having a strong sense of self and not letting others walk all over you and putting yourself first out of self-respect is surpassing the evils of National Socialism, you're a complete and utter moron. 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust, and you think that a man pursuing his own happiness is worse than that. People then ask me why I've lost my faith in humanity. Well, guys, it's because half the world's population are scumbags like these.
Tell it like it is, TIK.
TIK used Ayn Rand's definition, which is why altruism is being cast in such a negative light, who was one of the most anti-altruistic people ever to live. In short, a dictionary should have been used to define altruism, not a political thinker who completely opposes the idea. Okay, let's use a dictionary. Altruism, noun, the unselfish regard for or devotion to the welfare of others, and behavior by an animal that is not beneficial to or may be harmful to itself, but that benefits others of its species. Yep, that's precisely the definition we're using. But apparently, people are incapable of recognizing that I'm using the exact same definition. All altruism means is to do good without deliberate attention to self-interest. TIK takes it to an extreme. The general rule is that happy people do not become socialists. We all need something on this earth to believe in beyond ourselves.
Actually, as a socialist, I was very happy. Ignorance truly was bliss. I wasn't financially well off, and I wasn't perfectly happy, but I would say that I have become more unhappy since falling from socialism, and the reason why is because I see the reality of the world and haven't yet purged my altruistic morality from my system.
That's really interesting.
So that clash between my altruistic morality and the reality of the world around me is making me unhappy. I can't change the world, but I can change myself, and that's what I'm in the process of doing.
TIK is using Ayn Rand's definition, someone who promoted that being selfish and putting your wants above anyone else's...
Yeah, it seems like he's sort of fallen into the trap of thinking an ideology or a belief system is going to be the thing that sets him free. Whereas I've come to the conclusion, the opposite conclusion, that actually abandoning ideology and belief is the thing that's going to set us free. Which is, of course, an ideology, which makes it a paradox. Which, of course, it is the most fitting thing ever for nihilism, for it to be self-contradictory.
The sentence is not complete. I am aware.
So essentially, I don't think anything can really set us free. But I think that the closest thing to it is acknowledging the futility of belief.
Of that, and Ayn Rand's philosophy overall is angsty YouTube censorship anyway. But I still have to even attempt to pull him back into reality, even if he might completely ignore the whole comment.
Again, having been a socialist, and as someone still trying to purge the altruism in my system, I'm telling you that I didn't fall into Ayn Rand's philosophy first. I came to Ayn Rand only recently after realizing that I needed help in purging altruism from me. I still haven't achieved that, but I want to.
It's interesting, he's going on like a Manson arc, the whole purging altruism from his system. It reminds me a lot of what Marilyn Manson was going through in the early 90s. I'm going to give a like to this video, because this video not only was a good response to the criticisms he was given, it also taught me a lot about him as a person. It gave me a lot of insight into his story and what he's going through and his relationship with ideology. I feel like I understand TIK history a lot more after watching this video than I did before. And I have a slightly new, different perspective on him than I did before. So I'm glad I watched that video.